my students, because I teach an FSC class, I have to develop lessons that focus on giving my children the basic fundamental skills, such as reading, literacy. Many of my children have great receptive language skills, but expressive language, it's difficult for them to speak, it's difficult for them to put sentences together, or even to read basic words. And so I've developed this lesson so that they can develop a greater awareness of phonemic identification and blending of sounds together so that they can form words and read words. Well, I'd like the children to, this lesson focuses on the letter M. And so we have gone through the alphabet. The children have participated in creating their own alphabet poster boards. And this gives the children a sense of ownership, and it's relevant to them. We're working on M, so they say words that they are familiar with, but then they can also transfer that knowledge to M looks like this. This is, when I see the letter M, this is the sound that I have to think about. And then when I'm putting M with something else, what's going to happen? And so I want M to give not only understanding of the sound of M, but how it relates to the other letters in the alphabet. I'm really fortunate. I have a small group of students. In a regular education class, you have 20 students, you might have even 30 students. I think it's a lot more challenging for a teacher to know exactly how each student is doing. I'm really fortunate. In an FSC class with a small group of students, I know right away, and through observations, through immediate feedback, through just asking, answering, I can assess immediately, does the student understand what we did? Are there challenges? Where does that student fall in between the cracks? I have some students that are at the higher level. I have some students who are at the very, very lowest. And I'm able to, because of the class size, I'm able to assess it's ongoing. Well, my students have been with me, many of my students have been with me for a number of years. So we have developed rules, routines, expectations of what we do and what we don't do. And it's kind of funny because as a group, when a new student comes in, that student, luckily we have more students who understand the rules and routines, and that new student goes along and morphs into how the other children are listening and paying attention. I have very few challenging behaviors. The children understand that this is when we're learning, that this is what they have to do. And for the most part, there are very few challenges. And usually because the class is so small, I can monitor each child. I have adult help also. But for the most part, during an engaging lesson, if the children are motivated, there are no behavioral issues. When I think about my students, it's a little more challenging because many of my students don't have language. But that's not to say they don't have big questions to them. And so really, I have to think in smaller terms. So the smaller questions I ask, I really want them to be motivated to think, to critically think on their level. I create a lesson for them. And so in there's never one big question for my students, but it sort of brings it all together, the smaller questions, into a bigger step in learning, and so that I can lay a good foundation so that they can grow and access higher education. I try to create an environment where the students are engaged. And so far, I can usually tell if students are looking away, they're not listening, but for the most part, students are motivated because I try to add in elements that will interest them. I know that all my students love music. I know that all my students can be successful. Therefore, I create an environment where there's routines, they know they can be successful, so they want to participate. In turn, it's a catch-22. They want to participate, they're more successful, and they learn more. And so that's how I know. They're engaged because they want to be engaged, and sort of a sidebar of that, they're learning. It's relevant because reading literacy is a fundamental life skill. We all have to communicate. We all have to know how to communicate. Not only do I focus on the reading and the understanding of the letter, but incorporated in that lesson are social skills. Waiting your turn, listening to the teacher, modeling good practices. And so for this lesson, it's part of the larger picture of how my students are going to engage and be motivated to be part of the learning process.